For thousands of years, early humans were infected with lice, scabies, plus whatever local infections were endemic to their area. But then with the advent of trade, on the waterways, in the ocean, across land masses, the local infections spread. Trade with Ming China for porcelain gave us plague. We got the Black Death from trading with the Ottoman Empire for furs. Spice trade in Ceylon gave us cholera. Syphilis was from jute trade with the Mongols. And silk trade with Arabia got us gonorrhea. A lot of times herbs would not work for these more powerful infections. So people turned to metals instead. Early alchemists, when they were separating metals to make coins for royalty and governments, they knew that they could just heat up the ore and it would separate out the base metals. But then they were left with an amalgam of gold and silver and some other noble metals. And to separate those out into silver and gold coins, they used things like antimony, mercury, and sulfur. And somebody reasoned, if you could purify metals with these three things, could you purify humans? And indeed, you can suppress a lot of symptoms of diseases with those three substances, with mercury, antimony, and sulfur. Of course, they have terrible side effects. Sailors who would travel the oceans before they reached shore for leave would inject mercury up their urethra and hold it in their bladder. And then their venereal disease sores would disappear and they could go to the brothels. And then they would infect the women there. And in this way, a lot of diseases spread across the planet. And it was into this world that Samuel Hahnemann was born in the 1700s. He was a genius. He spoke over 10 languages, and he became a doctor. But he wasn't comfortable being a physician at that time where the protocols were toxic metals like mercury, sometimes lead, antimony, and so forth, and bloodletting. So he gave up his medical practice and began translating books. And when he was translating books, he came across something that piqued his interest. It said that cinchona bark could be a treatment for malaria. But cinchona bark, when given to a healthy person, creates fevers, which is a symptom of malaria. So he thought, is it possible that if you could find something that would create the symptoms in a healthy person that a diseased person was having in their diseased state, and gave the diseased person that particular compound, it would make their disease go away? Well, that was his idea. And that became the first rule of homeopathy. Like cures like. He was still looking for a way to deal with all the people who were looking for syphilis treatments and asking for mercury. So at that time, he was also diluting mercury more and more to see just how little he could get away with and still get a result. Well, it turned out that he could dilute it to the point where there was nothing left, and he was getting even better results with no toxicity, which gave him the idea for the second rule of homeopathy, which is you take a toxic substance, the more you dilute it, the less toxic it becomes, but the more curative it becomes in terms of a homeopathic remedy. And this was the beginning of his homeopathic career. The third thing he observed was that when he was traveling once either on horseback or in carriage and his remedies were bouncing around, they became more powerful. So then he came up with the third rule of homeopathy, which is if you shake, or his term was succuss, a remedy, it becomes more powerful. So taken all together, we have, if you have a diseased person who has symptoms, find some kind of ingredient in nature that creates the same symptoms when given to a healthy person. Dilute it down and shake it up and give it back to them. And this was the invention of homeopathy. As he was going forward in his career, there were some people that he had a more difficult time curing. And he thought about it and was, what could this be? He came up with three things that he thought would block a good cure. The first was stress or environment. So if the person was continually taking something that was stressing them, maybe they're working in a coal mine and coughing, well, no homeopathic remedy for a cough will work if they keep breathing in coal dust. The second was toxicity, and in this case, he specifically was referring to the toxicity that the doctors of his time were giving. And then the third was something called myasms. Now, myasms are an interesting idea, so let's talk about these. What Hahnemann said is that if you have a disease, specifically a skin disease, but any kind of disease, and you suppress it with a toxic compound, so the disease looks like it's gone away, but it hasn't, it'll go deeper into the tissues and will cause problems later on. He called that a miasm. Not only would it cause problems for you, but for future generations. So a person could get a miasm that they created themselves or inherit one from their ancestors. Maybe a great-great-grandfather treated syphilis with mercury, and now the great-great-grandson is experiencing this miasm of mercury and syphilis issues. Okay, so let's talk about what that might mean in terms of modern-day understanding. When Hahnemann was talking about environment and stress, well, this is epigenetics, lifestyle, diet. These are the common things we know we have to pay attention to. We can't expect to be healthy if we're not eating well, and if we are not exercising and doing all the things that we know are required just for general good health. The second is toxicity and doctor-induced diseases. Well, we are far more toxic now. We have a greater variety of toxins that we're exposed to. Vaccines when we're babies, chemtrails in the atmosphere, all the things in the food and the water, plus the hypermedication, the hyperpharmaceutical medication that our population is going through. What about the third one? What could miasms mean? Well, what I believe Hahnemann was talking about here was lateral or horizontal gene transfer and junk DNA and retroviruses. I'll explain. Horizontal gene transfer is the idea, well, it's not an idea anymore, we know it happens, that different species can pass genetic material. It's not just mother and father to child, but a bacteria or a virus or a fungus or a parasite can pass their DNA on to us. We know this is the case for retroviruses, which put their DNA directly into this, and that's been known for some time, but we also now know that other microorganisms can do this as well. And if you consider that only 2% of the DNA that's in your body directly codes for proteins that make you what you are, then you get an idea of the enormity of junk DNA that we have in us. Now, at first when the scientists discovered junk DNA, they said, wow, 98% of our DNA doesn't make us. It's just junk. What does it do? We now know that some of that junk DNA has purposes, but most of our DNA is not us. It's material that we have inherited from other microorganisms throughout our evolution. Not every life form does this. Some life forms like bladderwort or the common housefly have hardly any junk DNA. Others have a similar amount to us, like corn and tobacco. Tomato has 12 times as much DNA as we do, and an amoeba 200 times more. They're clearly less complicated life forms. So junk DNA is the miasm that Hahnemann was talking about, partially. In terms of suppressing a disease and causing a problem later, well, it's now been over 200 years, and we still haven't caught up to Hahnemann's genius. We still don't recognize that as a scientific fact yet, but I suspect we will in time. Some people have made the claim that homeopathy is pseudoscientific, that it's too dilute to have any effect, and that if it does have an effect, it's merely placebo. Let's look at these concerns. The human body is already responding to things at homeopathic levels. Neurotransmitters and hormones operate at 1 part per 100 million to 1 part per 10 quadrillion in our own tissues. So they're not too dilute, at least not at the lower potencies. In terms of placebo, in the year 2011, the Swiss government commissioned a large study of homeopathy, and their conclusions were that it works as well as some drugs, and in some cases better than some drugs. So it's not placebo either. Okay, if it does work, how might it work? Well, when you make a remedy, what you do is you make it in a glass vial, and you succuss it. You sharply wrap it against a book. When you do that, it creates a 10 atmosphere shock wave that goes through the tube. The shock wave can displace little bits of silica that the glass wall is made out of, and it can go into the solution. We know that computers operate with silicon chips and have memory based on that particular element. When you shake the remedy up and down, not only are you putting tiny, tiny bits of silica into the solution, but the rapid acceleration and deceleration is creating a magnetic charge, a magnetic field. Is it possible that the magnetic field from the shaking is carrying the information of the remedy into the silica, and that is what we're doing, that we are in essence reprogramming ourselves? It's an idea. A series of laws in Europe called Codex Alimentaris are making homeopathics and many nutritional products very difficult to obtain. A number of Europe's oldest homeopathic firms have decided to close shop rather than deal with the bureaucracy of the Codex. This means one day we may not be able to get homeopathic remedies. Because of this, I'm going to teach you how to make them from your own body. This is called an Autonosode. In this case, I'm going to teach you how to make it from urine, which contains many of the water-soluble toxins that we excrete every day. So it's a great place to start. To do this, you're going to need some 10 ml glass test tubes with a plastic top. You're going to want a paperback book. I suggest The Organon of Medicine by Hahnemann. Some distilled water. And then a glass pipette, 10 ml. And some disposable pipettes, as well as a disposable cup. Okay. So, I have filled this test tube up to the halfway point, which means I put in 5 ml. Each ml is 20 drops, about. So 5 ml is 100 drops. So if I put in, and let's say this contained a drop of urine, 1 drop of urine into here, I'd have 100-to-1 dilution, 1C. You then put the top on and do it firmly because you're going to be shaking this. And you will rap sharply on a book 100 times. And then swirl. If you're doing this clinically, you may want to have a machine do this for you. That would be an automatic succussor. And an automatic vortexer. But you don't need this fancy equipment to make homeopathic remedies. Simply wrap it on a book 100 times, swirl it a bit. Why are we swirling? Well, when we wrap it on the book and create that 10 atmosphere shock wave, we're taking the electrons in the water, going up and down and accelerating and decelerating them, which generates a magnetic field, which may be how we program the silica. When you swirl it, well, if you rotate a magnetic field, you create an electric field. So it may be that swirling adds another bit of benefit. So now we have our first 1C remedy. Now we're going to take this out and pour it into a cup. But there'll always be a little bit that will remain. You don't get it all out. This makes the basis for the next dilution. So we're going to take some distilled water. And being careful not to touch the pipetter to the test tube, we're going to put in five ml more of distilled water. Now, accuracy here is not vitally important. I haven't actually measured that I have exactly 5 ml. It's close enough. Okay, again, we're going to take this remedy and we're going to either wrap it on a book and swirl it, or put it in an automatic succussor and vortexer. We now have our 2C remedy. And we're going to do this 6 to 12 times. filling, succussing, until finally we have the remedy we're looking for. Let's say that this is our 6x remedy, which is the dilution I like to use. How might we use this? Well, there's a couple of ways. If we want to be sophisticated about it, we could put the remedy into a little holder with a laser behind it, and we could pass the information through a laser into our skin. But you don't need to do anything that sophisticated. What you can do is simply drink the remedy. Before you do a detox, consider doing something to open up the detox pathways. You might consider glytamins. The more open the pathways are, the more quickly the toxins that you mobilize can leave. Now, how might we use an auto-nosode as part of a detox protocol? What I like to do is take something with EDTA in it on day 1. You might consider metacardium. And then get the urine from the next morning and make a remedy from that. It's going to have all the metals that the EDTA pulled out that night. So that remedy would be very personalized for your particular toxic profile. Then you can go back and forth between EDTA and Autonosodes. The EDTA pulling the metals out, the nosodes educating the body to pay more attention to pushing them out from deeper and deeper tissues, and then the EDTA grabbing onto those again. If you go to our website, www.remedylink.com, the whole protocol is written out for you. How else might you do it? You can do the same protocol for chemicals. You could take something that is a chemical detox. You might consider Xenoplex. The next morning, capture your urine, or at least 1 drop, and make a nosode, a homeopathic autonosode from that. And then as that flushes it out of you, grab the next day, take another chemical detox to grab onto them. And again, you can go back and forth between the detox of the homeopathic and the detox of the product to continue to get to deeper and deeper levels of toxicity in your tissue. There are a lot of other things you can make homeopathic remedies from that the human body will create. You can do tears for emotional issues. Typically, emotional homeopathics are done at 200 C and higher. It can take a while, but for something that's happening right there and then in the moment, and if you catch a tear from a child's eye, you could make a 12 or a 30 C remedy, and it might be very helpful. For blood-based diseases, you might take a drop of blood. For women with menstrual problems, you could take some menstrual blood. You could do sweat. If someone is having a teenager with terrible acne, you might consider getting a little bit of the exudate from a pimple to make a remedy. There's really no limit to what you can do in terms of making remedies to help your body uncover deeper and deeper levels of toxicity to release. If you've been given pharmaceutical agents, you can also make homeopathics for that, but that's beyond the scope of this particular talk. Toward the end of Hahnemann's life, he was challenged by the need to be patient for a remedy to do its job, but the desire to help people that were suffering move more quickly. And he came up with the idea of the LM potencies. What he came up with was a slight change in how he was doing it. Rather than using dry pellets, he was giving the homeopathic remedies in water. He would do low dilutions but high succussions, and he would put a little rotational energy into there. And finally, he would do what was called plussing, which is you take half the remedy and then you fill it back up with water, spin it a little bit, because from Hahnemann's understanding, you never wanted to give the same remedy twice, so spinning it or succussing it just a little bit would alter it enough that the body would see it as something new. And then that way you could take the same remedy plussed each time 2, 3, 4 times a day, every day, rather than what he had been doing, which was one remedy and then maybe wait weeks, months, even a year before the next one. What we've actually done today is very close to the LM potencies. Homeopathy is a fascinating field. Hahnemann was one of humanity's rare, selfless geniuses that was centuries ahead of his time. If you have any questions about how this might work for you, feel free to give us a call or an email. Take care.